Here now is your host, Don Henderson.
Over in the American League, the Senators.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Phillies
Let's
Preview.
roll back and see what happened.
Trenton native Don Henderson has taken to sports like the way a duck takes to water. They just plunge right in. In fact, while in Trenton High School, Don was a member of the Eastern State Swimming and Diving Championship teams. During that time, he was named an All-American. After graduation, Don attended the University of Texas on a swimming scholarship where he also played basketball. In 1957, Don hung up the sports equipment as a player and began diving into broadcasting. Don hosted a daily sports show on WBUD in Trenton and also hosted a two-way telephone show. Then, in 1960, he moved to WTTM, also in Trenton. Along with Henderson's exciting and interesting two-way talk radio show, Don broadcasted football, basketball, and Madison Square Garden boxing matches. In 1967, Don moved to Channel 29 and WIBF-TV in Philadelphia and given the task to create a new program. Don, along with Taylor Grant, Alan Scott, and Carol Henderson, put together the station's first 6 and 11 p.m. newscast. He also brought his two-way talk show to television. Along with interviewing sports personalities from all 4 major sports teams, Don created the Notre Dame pregame show with Eagles quarterback Norm Snead. For 16 years, Don broadcasted Temple basketball, the NCAA tournament games, and the NIT for Temple University. He spent much time at WCAU Radio doing two-way talk and also sports. The situation was the same when Henderson moved to WWDB. Let's stop the 6-second delay and welcome Don Henderson into the Broadcast Pioneers Hall of Fame.
Coming up here now is like being in the Vatican and trying to follow the Pope. There's one theme that has run through most of the show this evening, and I think justifiably so. And I'd like to, first of all, introduce my family because they've been my biggest supporters. I have 32 of them here tonight. And they've come from all over the country, and for Lee, who was up here a little bit earlier, I'd like to tell you, you got some company. My son graduated from the University of North Carolina. His wife, Cindy, graduated from North Carolina. My grandson graduated from North Carolina. His wife, Jane, graduated from North Carolina. So you got a lot of support in the room tonight if you're a North Carolinian. Only thing I can remember about North Carolina more than anything else was that we went down there to play basketball with John Chaney in the Temple House, and we had the biggest margin of victory in the Dean Dome in the history of the building until last year or the year before. I can't remember. Team came in and finally won, broke John's record. But it's a great honor to be with these folks in this room tonight who have accomplished so much. I'd like to say that I really had 2 careers. I'm a bartender that turned into a broadcaster. I had 2 brothers, and we owned a relatively successful tavern in Trenton, New Jersey, a couple blocks from the Capitol. And just by luck, I started to do some radio shows, and every Sunday night we had a group of people that we had music all the time, but on Sunday night we featured some of the best. We had Doc Severinsen, we had Clark Terry, we had Jerome Richardson. We had so many of the great Coleman Hawkins, who's probably got the best record of Body and Soul that was ever recorded. And so we used to do a show for an hour from the bar every Sunday night. And somebody that Ed Moore, who was the first director over at Channel 29, used to listen to the show. He lived in Pennsylvania, not too far away. And he called me one day and he said, you ever do any television? I said, no, I don't do anything. I'm a bartender. And so consequently, he said, well, come down and see me at Channel 29. So I went down, and he said, I know you do some radio shows, talk shows, and so forth. My brothers always covered for me. They did all the work. All I did was go out and have fun. So what happened was I went down to see him, and he said, as somebody said earlier tonight, Taylor Grant and so forth, they were the two key people doing the news. And he said, we don't have anybody doing sports. He said, would you think about doing it? You do it on the radio, would you do it here? I said, well, I guess so. I don't really know very much about this. And he said, well, come down next week and I'll have you in for a week or two and do some rehearsals and see how it goes. I said, all right. So I went down. It was a Monday morning. I went down, and my wife, who was a school teacher and a homemaker, really more than anything else, because she had stopped teaching when I started to work. And so what happened was she came with me. And she had been at Catholic University and had done some theater and so forth. And so Ed Moore said, well, what do you do? And she said, I'm a housewife. He said, well, I think it'd be a great gimmick to put the two of you together. He'll do the sports and you do the weather. I said, okay. So we did a week's worth of practice and so forth. We went with Taylor Grant, and so we started to do the show. And my wife loved the show. It really did. We did the 6 and we did 11. And she did a little 5-minute break in between the movies. And what happened was that the thing that she really enjoyed more than anything else, we went to Lord & Taylor. She got clothes every day to wear for the... She spent more time in Lord & Taylor looking at clothes than she did on the broadcast. So that's how I really got started into broadcasting, and it really evolved from there. We started with the talk shows and so forth, and she stayed with me for about 2.5 years, and she said, this business is too precarious. And the one thing that I did have the opportunity to beat Bill Fox's daughter and his grandson, who was up here just a little bit ago, they didn't mention how much he paid people. In those days, salaries were not everything you want to see. And my wife said, how could you possibly stay with this? You're not going to make any money. I said, well, it's a lot of fun. I'm seeing every game I can possibly see. What else could I ask for? So she went back to teaching, and she wound up being a professor out at the College of New Jersey. And unfortunately, passed away far too early. But my children are all here, 2 boys and a girl. The grandchildren, I am very, very disappointed because my one granddaughter just had our first great-grandchild, and she said when I talked to her this afternoon, I'm not coming down, I've heard enough of you. So she decided to stay home tonight. But it's a lot of fun. It's a great career, and I just want to say a couple things. Dan Baker touched on it, and that is that the people that we had to work with. I'll go with the newest sport in Philly, which was the Flyers. Gene Hart was the Flyers. Everything he did was the Flyers. His greatest broadcast was not winning the Stanley Cup 2 years in a row. His greatest broadcast was when the Russians came in with the Russian national team, and they played the Flyers at the Spectrum, and the normal 17,707 were in attendance. So what happened was the Russians came in, and Gene Hart pronounced every single Russian player's name as though he was in Moscow. The greatest. We mentioned earlier Bill Campbell, the dean. He's been the dean of Philadelphia sports for broadcast a game in Hershey, Pennsylvania, where Will Chamberlain scored 100 points. And Bill didn't have the tape. Some listener, when we were doing a show at WCAU, called him on the phone and said, Bill, do you have a tape of that game against the Knicks in Hershey, Pennsylvania, where Will scored the 100? He said, no. So he sent it to him. And every time you hear that 100 on the radio, it was because a listener taped the show, sent it to Bill, and it became the national broadcast. So working with Bill Campbell, working with Harry Callis, I introduced, when I was doing the pregame shows, Harry, Andy, Woody, and Wheels. Harry Callis, Andy Musser, Chris Wheeler, of course, and Richie Ashburn was one of the keys to all the things that happened. He started the Big Five basketball on Channel 17. Was a great player for the Phillies. He went to the Cubs, and then he went to the Mets, and even this last year he hit 301, had the leading batting average in baseball for the New York Mets for years, and was a terrific guy. So every time that we went out to work, we worked with the greatest group of people that you could ever want to work with. There was never a time. And one other thing about that was that we had a sort of a thing that happened in broadcasting where you wouldn't go from one station to another. I never had one person in 50 years tell me that they would not switch. If they were working at Channel 6, they'd come over and be on a show at WCAU. Never once had a person, a player or a talent, say that they would not come over and be a part of the show. And we did 2 hours every night. We did shows for 3 hours in the daytime. Every rain delay, I'll tell you about two instances. One, we're in a World Series, and Timmy McCarver's doing the game on national TV in the booth right here. We're over here, Harry Callis, myself, Wheels, Andy, and rain delay. I walked over to the national booth. I said, Tim, we got a fill here. Would you mind coming over? He gets out of his seat, gets up, walks over, sits down, does a half hour to cover the rain delay. One time earlier than that, I was in Connie Mack Stadium. It was Shibe Park in the 1950 World Series when Joe DiMaggio hit the home run. They swept the series, by the way, from the Phillies, 4-0. Joe DiMaggio hit the home run in game number 2 that won it, I think 2-1 or 1-0. I can't remember the score. And 30 years later, Joe is in the vet, and we're sitting there, and Eddie Liberatore, who was the #1 scout for the Dodgers and a great friend, and we used to go out with Joe in Trenton. Joe loved a little Italian restaurant called Rossi's, and we'd go in the back room, and we'd have lunch in the back room at Rossi's. And so just what happened, we had a half-hour rain delay. We're at the stadium, and Joe's there with Eddie Liberatore. And I said, Eddie, would Joe come on with us? You know, he was pretty standoffish, and I just knew him from going to lunch with him. And Eddie said, I don't know, but I'll talk to him. So I went in, and rain's coming down, and all of a sudden Eddie Liberatore comes over. Here's Joe. So we did about 15, 18 minutes. It's on most of the podcasts you hear all over on the things you have at home with computers and so forth. Everybody says to me, where'd you get this interview with Joe? I said, well, he just walked in and sat down. And at the same time, when the rain delay in the World Series came along, Steve Carlton hadn't talked to anybody. He hadn't done anything with reporters for 10 years. I could stand right next to him. He wouldn't say anything. Never talk to you. Timmy is sitting in the booth there with the rain delay, and Steve Carlton comes to the door. Timmy came in, did 15 minutes with us, talking back and forth. These are the kinds of people that, if you're in sports, as Jimmy said, and he's absolutely right, if you're in sports, the camaraderie, what people do for one another. And I just have to salute, Jim Murray for what he has done. What we've done is insignificant compared to what Jimmy's done. So I thank you very much, Jerry. I thank you. I thank the organization, and I thank my first wife, who was kind enough to get me into the business to start with, and my second wife, who we've been together for a long time now. And I want to thank her. She was Director of Building and Compliance in Morristown Memorial Hospital up in North Jersey, and she's done a terrific job to keep me on a straight line. So thank you very, very much.